just got back from a year studying abroad in Melbourne, Australia. I wanted to do a video going through some of my recommendations and my favourite things I did whilst I was in Melbourne. So if you're visiting or you're also going to be studying there, these are my favourite things that I would recommend you do, from things like cafes, museums, days out, places to go. So I think I'm going to start off with museums and galleries. Firstly, kind of an obvious one is the National Gallery of Victoria. There's like a couple of different sort of parts of it, but the main one is, or my favourite bit I guess, is the NGV International. I would probably say that is the main one. It's just what it says on the tin. It's a beautiful art gallery. There's also always loads of new exhibitions that they bring in every now and then. Definitely worth a visit if you're in Melbourne. Next is ACMI, which is the Australian Centre for the Moving Image. Australian Centre for the Moving Image. So basically it's all about film, video, television, video games, and it's so cool. There's so much to see and it's really interactive as well. I would definitely recommend that, and it's also free entry, which is obviously fantastic. I would highly recommend that one, especially if you're interested in film and stuff like that. But even if you're not, I'd say it's definitely worth a visit. Then I have the Melbourne Museum, which again is sort of like an obvious thing. You can learn about the history of Melbourne, and there's a lot of like Australian history, and it's a really nice place to spend a few hours, especially like if it's raining, because it's Melbourne and it's always raining. You might want to head into the museum. And finally I have the State Library. I don't really know if this counts as a museum, but you should definitely pay this a visit if you're in Melbourne. Like even if you're not going to study, you can just go and head up to the 6th floor, I think. You can look down into the beautiful room and you can see the domed ceiling. It's so cool and so pretty. And then they also have a couple of little like artworks and a cafe. I think next I'm going to move on to the food section. So I'm going to talk you through some of my favourite restaurants and cafes. So firstly is the Arbory Afloat, which is where I went with my parents on Christmas Day. It's a little floating restaurant on the Yarra River. As I said, we went on Christmas Day. It was so hot, and there's a little pool and you can go and like have drinks by the pool. The food was really good, the drinks were really good. Definitely for the summer. I think it's actually closed in the winter, but in the summer would highly recommend. Next is the Loon Croissanterie, which is very famous. If you're planning a trip to Melbourne, you've probably heard of this. Yeah, it's a classic and it's definitely a very touristy thing to do, and there's usually a very big queue outside, but it's for good reason. They do the most beautiful croissants, and then they also have their monthly specials. So the first time I went, I just went with the plain croissant and it was so good. They have hype, but it's well deserved. And then I also recently went and I tried one of the monthly specials, which was a cruffin. I think I'll insert the clips of when I went and had that. It was so nice. Got my little croissant. Actually, I didn't get a croissant, I got a cruffin. I think it's a cross between a croissant and a muffin, like a crossbreed. I've just come to this little park to enjoy my little pastry. It looks very tasty. I'm not really sure how to go about eating this. It's really good. It's like a croissant. It's very filled. I'm a bit nervous about the birds. Can they eat croissants? It's very tasty. But I will say there's a couple of different locations. There's one in like the city centre, which is kind of the main one and the one that gets the biggest queues. But there's also one in Fitzroy and Armadale. I've only been to the CBD, which is like the city centre, and Armadale, so I can't tell you about Fitzroy, but I'm sure it's great. And then I think they actually also have one in Brisbane. If you're heading to Brisbane, I don't know why you'd be watching a Melbourne recommendations video. But next I've got a couple of my favourite cafes. So first is the Laurent Bakery. They have quite a few locations around Melbourne. They do the most fantastic little baked treats. They have this glazed sort of bun, which I had a couple of times. It's so tasty. What you'd expect from a cafe, like pastries, sandwiches, hot drinks, iced drinks. It's really good quality. My second little cafe recommendation is Urban Providore. This one is in South Yarra. I had the most beautiful toast there and I haven't stopped thinking about it since I had it. It came with honey butter. It was literally toast, like just toast. I think it was sourdough toast, and then it came with a little pot with honey and butter in, and it was warm, and it was basically, it was really tasty, and if I could have that toast again, I would walk back to Australia for that toast. I have just remembered one more cafe which I went to, which was really cool. I think it was called Higher Ground. This was near Southern Cross Station. The vibe of the cafe was really cool, and like the interior design, and there I had fruit toast, which was also spectacular. So that was really cool, but I would say you might want to book there if you want to have a nice like sit down meal, because we ended up having to share a table, which is fine, but like, yeah. Okay, so I also wanted to talk about some things to do both in the city and a little bit further afield. Firstly is the markets, especially the markets in Fitzroy. I'm pretty sure that every weekend. They're really cool. It's just a really cool vibe. You can get like vintage clothes or handmade items. Everyone's like really creative, and it's such a cool little activity on a Saturday. The next thing to do in the city is go on a little walk around all the gardens. My favourites were Carlton Gardens and Fitzroy Garden, and then like in that area there's just a lot of little gardens, and you can just sort of hop between them. And speaking of gardens, I would also really recommend the Royal Botanic Gardens. Really, really beautiful. It's really big, and they've got so many beautiful plants and flowers. Really beautiful birds hang out there because they like the plants, I guess. Especially now, while it's winter, they have this thing called Lightscapes, which is this light exhibition show sort of thing. So they put lights all throughout the Botanic Gardens. It's beautiful. I went last year and I would really recommend that. Speaking of nighttime winter activities, there is the winter night market at the Queen Victoria Market, which is really cool but extremely busy. Like, if you don't like crowds, don't go. It's not worth it. Loads of food stalls and like little souvenir shops. The Queen Victoria Market is also definitely worth a visit during the day when they don't have that night market thing going on. Okay, so now moving on to things a bit more out of the city. I'm going to start with the Great Ocean Road, which I would say is pretty much a must do. I did it with my parents when they came to visit. We did a little tour and we just did it in a day, but you can take longer. You can like van life it, stop off in more places. We just sort of did the highlights, but we saw wild koalas, which was amazing. My next place I'd recommend a little day trip to is the Grampians Mountains. So I went here on my birthday. Yeah, I really loved it. It was just so pretty. Another place I'd recommend you visit if you get the chance would be the Yarra Valley. So I've been here a couple of times. I went with my parents. We went on my mum's birthday to these wineries. We did a bit of a wine tasting tour, but I don't drink, so I didn't partake in that. It was still really, really beautiful, and if you do drink, obviously you can do the wine tasting. But I've also been recently, and I went to the Yarra Valley Chocolatery. That can't be right. Chocolaterie. That is so worth a visit. There's beautiful views. They have a cafe. I had a white hot chocolate, which was stunning. But at the moment, if you're there at the moment, they're doing a 4-week hot chocolate festival, and they have so many incredible looking flavours. I think they're on week 2 as I'm filming this, so it should still be on. So if you're watching this, you need to go. Yeah, it's definitely also a good place to get some souvenirs if you're wanting to bring some chocolate home to your friends. I would highly recommend a visit to the Yarra Valley if you are able to, and go to the chocolatery. My next little day trip recommendation is to visit Phillip Island. Phillip Island is where they have the little penguins, or the fairy penguins. If you go to that kind of nature reserve area, you can watch them come in at nighttime. It's called the Penguin Parade, and it's so cute. They are literally so cute. That was a really, really cool experience. My final recommendation for a place to go outside of the city is Wilson's Promontory. It's not as sort of spoken about as something like the Great Ocean Road or the Grampians, I guess because it is a little bit further out of the city, but it is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to. And I also got to see wild wombats. I bought this little wombat to commemorate. Isn't he the cutest? I also saw wild kangaroos there. If you can get to Wilson's Prom, I would so recommend it. So I think that's pretty much all of my recommendations and all of my favourite things that I did. Obviously I did a lot more than that, but I can't really squeeze everything into one video. But I did make quite a few little videos while I was in Australia, so if you are interested in what I got up to, as well as the travelling I did outside of studying in Melbourne, then you can go back on my channel if you'd like to. That's all I wanted to talk about in today's video, so thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you are planning a trip to Melbourne, then I hope it was helpful. If you do have any questions about my year abroad, studying in Melbourne, living in Melbourne, etc., feel free to let me know in the comments. But yeah, that's all I've got to say, so thank you so much for watching today's video, and I'll see you next time I post. Bye!